Welcome back to Leadership In. This is our shorter format episode that we're calling The Open Exchange. And so Geoff and I on alternating weeks are going to be chit-chatting about things that are going on and putting in our 2 cents on it. So Geoff, how's it going?
Yeah, it's going. I'm excited to sit down and have a quick chat here. I think first, let's talk a little bit about kind of how we're doing and what we're doing. I know we're huge in Vietnam, so that's worth talking about off the top. But yeah, we've got a few things to dip into that I think people will find interesting.
Yeah, I mean, the stats, it's kind of interesting. The podcast is hosted on Spotify for Creators, and no surprise, 80% of the audience across all platforms is in the US, 10% in Canada, and 3% in the UK, and then a smattering across other countries, including Vietnam, which Claude tells me is because there's a demand for business-related podcasts in Vietnam. So that's kind of fun.
I mean, there's 2 things you go to Vietnam for, it seems like. One is custom tailored suits at a reasonable price. And 2 is any episode of Leadership In. That's it. We're going to throw a Leadership In conference in Hanoi. Yeah. Everybody mark your calendars.
So for anybody who missed it, we had Pooja on our first full episode that was released last week. And she was just outstanding. Entrepreneur in residence at Luma Partners and a whole history across her career at
Disney. Yeah. She was president of TrueX, worked at Comcast Advertising as general manager. She's had a very storied career across a bunch of different things. Listen, when we talk about stats, if that episode doesn't drive stats, I don't know what will. Just that sense of ease. And she even referred to it on LinkedIn herself to say, it's rare that you sit in a conversation where you have a microphone in front of you and you don't remember you have a microphone in front of you. I also felt like the little tidbits that were sprinkled across were really interesting. And when you listened, as you do prior to me, and pulled out a bunch of quotes, I'll leave it to you to throw out the really interesting one that I think pulled everyone in.
Yeah, she tells this really fun, but really compelling story where she's playing Jenga with her daughter, and her daughter says to her, "Mommy, you have to remember, never play scared." The story is just so sweet and so engaging and so impactful. That story alone is worth the listen, but it's one of many things across the whole episode. He's such a wonderful storyteller and really links together personal experiences and how to have impact and how to link these things back to leadership. That quote in particular and that story is one that I am confident we're going to come back to again because it's just so good.
It's such an incredible piece of advice, too. That's the other thing. It's such a phenomenal piece of advice. And when you listen to athletes, people who perform under pressure constantly, talk through what allows them to function in those scenarios. I don't know that they would necessarily ever articulate it that way, but they all have this like preternatural sense of calm about them. There's this very famous story about Joe Montana throwing a game-winning pass and pointing at John Candy in the crowd in the Super Bowl. In his first Super Bowl, he led a game-winning drive, and he's in the huddle. He's like, "Oh, is that John Candy?" And his whole team is like, "What? Like, we're down in the Super Bowl trying to win, and you're pointing John Candy." And it's just that ability to lock everything else out and focus on this that a 4-year-old would articulate as "don't play scared" is very impressive for a child of that age. But it's phenomenal advice in every facet of your life if you can follow it.
100%. Also big, if you weren't on LinkedIn in the last, 2-3 weeks, the Possible Conference was all over it, everywhere. Really hard to avoid. I was down there in Miami Beach at the iconic Fontainebleau Hotel with adjacent venues of Soho House, one door to the south, and Eden Rock, one door to the north. This was the 4th year of the conference. It is bigger than ever. I think they said there were 8,000 registered attendees. Like, it was just enormous. The venue itself is beautiful, and then the production value on top of that is really quite incredible. And they've found themselves a really nice niche in the calendar, too. There's like this April slot. You're far enough in that everybody's got their goals. They have some sense of how the year is trending. There's still enough time to do deals and make things happen and have an impact in year, which obviously the more time goes by, the less that's true. So April is just such a good time to make that happen. But I mean, it was huge. I had good meetings on behalf of some clients. I had some really good conversations with prospects.
Yeah. So I'm curious of your actual takeaways. And just to talk a little bit about what you just said, I was there in 2024. That was the only one that I've attended. There were about 1,500 people that year. And I do remember them saying two things while we were there. One was they wanted it to be the Cannes of North America, was the goal, right? And then to become a tentpole in the calendar. So if you think about this in the programmatic ecosystem, or even in really the advertising technology ecosystem, there are four big tentpoles. I think we're now settling in on CES in January, on Possible in the April timeframe, on Cannes in the Father's Day, late June timeframe, and then we're settling in on programmatic IO and or Ad Week in late September, early October. And then people do their holiday parties in December. And then, shampoo, rinse, repeat. So when you think about it that way, I mean, that lays it out pretty nicely. And then you can sprinkle in your client-based stuff. You can sprinkle in your own stuff, your sales kickoff, whatever it is. The few things that I heard about it this time, and I was going to make a joke when you were talking, which was possible last week. It was hard to tell on LinkedIn. But the few things that I've heard about it, I would say mixed reviews is what I would say. I think I've heard a lot of this conference was really good from a meetings perspective. So I saw a lot of the people that I needed to see on the cadence that I needed to see them quarterly. The second thing that I heard was there were just way too many people. It was too hard to move around. You didn't get the casual hallway bump in, let me take 5 minutes of your time and catch up that you kind of do at CES that you always get on the Quasette in Cannes. Those sort of serendipitous encounters were not there possible. And then the thing that I heard about the content was it was mixed, right? Before we hopped on, you said the same thing. They didn't seem to have that big marquee that they've had in years past. But yeah, I'm very curious to hear about what your on the ground takes from Possible.
So I would definitely say that about the content. It's unusual that I go to much, if any, content. Possible was kind of the exception for the last couple of years, where there was usually one big marquee piece of content that they really drew people in with it. There was one year where Linda Yaccarino interviewed Elon Musk, and last year Pitbull was there. This year, I mean, they had some stuff, but I couldn't even tell you what it was. There was nothing that pulled me away from a meeting into any of the content venues. So I do think that they have lost a little bit of an edge there, or maybe I'm too old to recognize some of the celebrities that they pulled in on stage.
That's definitely possible.
I would kind of disagree on the serendipitous run-ins. I had quite a lot of them, and the venues are spread out, so you may or may not have them happen, but I did have quite a lot of run-ins, and I think it was valuable from that perspective. But they definitely have done a lot to gate the access. You could get into the lobby of the Fontainebleau without a pass, but you couldn't get much farther than that. The Eden Rock, which was the other official venue, you could not even get in the front door without a pass there. Definitely, they're trying to make sure that you're bought in order to be able to get the full value and the serendipitous opportunities.
When you sit and think about the meetings that you had, did one or two things pop that were super interesting and worth talking about?
I think the two things that really were common across the meetings I had, which is partly related to the areas that I work in, but I think this is generally indicative of the industry. It's all about demand and data. So a lot more conversations similar to the kinds of things that Jounce talks about in terms of direct supply and direct demand, and what does that look like? And it shows up in curation. It shows up in new entrants like new retail media entrants and others. How do you add value to the ecosystem? Less things that are building scale immediately and more things that are driving value. And so looking at that in terms of direct demand and differentiated data sets, a lot of the questions that we're presented with is how are you adding value? It was much more prominent than I would say has been the case in the past. So that was one. And actually, one other thing that this isn't only an observation on Possible, but it did certainly surface at Possible as AI and agentic and all of these things move from sort of buzzword to reality. There are more platforms that are starting to present themselves as AI platforms and talking about themselves that way. And there's also this parallel debate over, is the buy side going to win? Is the sell side going to win? What's the future of a DSP or an SSP? And I think that at least one of the things that is likely to happen here is some of that is going to get blended under the hood of we're an AI platform. We are more of a console to help you reach users however they might be, which might be programmatic, might not be programmatic. Some of the work that MediaOcean pioneered is getting extended with Trade Desk's announcement with putting their bidder inside of certain retail media platforms. And Yahoo just announced something similar where their bidder will be inside of Sky, I think it is. Stack It Up did a whole bunch of fundraising on this basis where they're like, we want to be a MarTech platform. And they've got partnerships with companies like HubSpot to sort of stitch together the experience. And again, to try to be more deliberate and powerful in terms of how do you connect these dots and how do you use it to enhance the consumer experience and how do you use it to drive business outcomes by stitching together these different points across the ways in which consumers travel across the ecosystem.
Yeah, AI seems to be accelerating that. I don't think there's any question. The thing that troubles me with anything like this is, are we AI for the sake of AI? Are we all birds
Yeah.
and transitioning from a shoe company to an AI company? Or are we actually solving a problem? Right? Because workflow efficiency is a real problem. And if you're leveraging AI to solve workflow inefficiency, that seems reasonable to me. Maybe unifying the sides of the business with AI that can efficiently connect and selling demand and supply. That may be problem enough.
I think a lot of the things that are ultimately real at this point are basically workflow, but that's a good thing. Like that's going to be an all boats rise situation, and that's really positive. And there were starting to be more examples. Everybody's talking about it, and they're like, we've got a chatbot that'll let you inquire about segments and then traffic your segments and set up your stuff.
Where I always focus, again, in addition to what problem are you solving, I'm like, are you automating away the things humans shouldn't have to do? Are you automating away the interesting things that humans should be doing? So are you automating away the work, or are you automating away the creativity, the strategy, the strategic thinking? Like, what are you automating? And if what you're doing is automating away this stuff to allow people to continue to just do drudge work 40 hours a week, I don't think you're doing AI right. I don't think you're doing life right, but I definitely don't think you're doing AI right.
Right. There's been this sort of transition. Everybody was throwing everything at it because they didn't know where to start. Now there's starting to be actual use cases. I talked to one publisher who was like, we've got a seller agent and it helps negotiate with our agency clients on reserved media buys, and it does this and this and this and this, and we've got one campaign that just finished and two more that are live, and we still have a gap on this portion of the workflow, but this is saving the humans and the emails and the IOs going back and forth. I'm like, okay, is this the most exciting use case ever? No, but like that's a real use case that definitely deserves some automation, and hats off to you for starting there.
Totally agree. I'm working on something similar with a company that I'm working with now, which is how are we automating that back and forth on the IO negotiation, right? You submit an IO to us and we want to enter it in our system. Have you filled out all the information? AI bot reviews it, says yes or no, sends it back if it doesn't with an email that says here's what you're missing, sends it forward if it does. That's a really simple, and a human for the time has to review some of that and make sure that it's actually doing it correctly. But I think ultimately and eventually that will solve that. That's great. However, putting the plan together, understanding what the client outcomes are, figuring out the right way to make those outcomes, tying together all the interesting stuff and putting together a go-to-market strategy. I mean, yeah, AI could do that, but is that the stuff you want to automate away? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. Maybe eventually, but right now, probably not. Okay, I could talk to you all day, but we should probably wind this one down.
Yeah. All right. Remind me what our email is. Should people have questions, thoughts, comments, guest suggestions? Where should they email us?
Email us at leadershipinpodcast, all one word, at gmail.com.
All right. And then you can also follow the show. We're basically all the places you might listen: Apple Podcasts, Spotify. We're now on YouTube and a whole host of others. You can even ask your Alexa device to play Leadership In, and she'll be able to do that for you. So yeah, hit follow, and we will be back next week with another full episode with some really great guests.